So nice to meet you.
Very nice to meet you as well.
Thank you for agreeing to this. I've been looking forward to this for many days.
What an honor. Thank you so much. So are you at home?
I'm at my partner's place in
Nice.
Orange. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
nice. Yeah.
It's just a quick 10-hour drive from my place.
Okay.
Well, that's Australia, I guess, right? Things are farther apart than we're used to here.
Yeah. When Elizabeth and I, you may have heard this, but you probably know that we've seen your Australia story piece countless times.
Okay.
And
no,
oh, you didn't? Oh yeah, many. We've shared it around the world actually with thousands of people.
Yeah,
And that's why we're excited to talk about your book, by the way, so we can share that too. And
well, you're probably the reason I get emails from all over the globe.
I hope so.
We are, or we're sorry, depending on how you feel.
Yes, there it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, can I ask, is your book, it will be released here in the United States, right?
I haven't been approached by anyone from the US to publish it.
Oh, maybe we should work on that. But I wanted to just say the reason I asked about your place is in the Australia story piece. I absolutely love your home. I just it's so wonderful, and it's just something I admired about the life you live.
Look, there's lots of story. I love my place. I absolutely love my place. It's so integral to who I am. And one of the things that I did when I was designing it, I only put one tap and I put it outside. And I did that to remind me of all the people that actually don't have running water, all the people that have to walk every morning to get water.
Yeah.
And when I get
over half the world, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and when we talk, so, I'm very grateful that I have a tap, or as you call it, I guess, a faucet that I can just walk out and it's close, it's handy. I turn it on and there's water comes out of it.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. I have to say I'm not surprised, which is one of the reasons why we were so excited that you honored us and agreed to have this conversation, because there could be so many ways I might describe this to you when I think about you, but I, especially with your training and your career as a professor, and again, we know you only through the Australian story, so I recognize that's a particular narrative. I'm sure it's incomplete, but there was something in the Australia story where you talked about discovering a book about sociology and the study of understanding human society, and it just is one of the most profound things in my mind, was to have an opportunity to talk to you and hear your take on that subject, on how you view society, but very interestingly, your view on the sort of dominant narrative of society that we walk around with, which I'm going to betray an attitude about, I think is largely filled with lies. Like progress is having to tap inside your house, rather than the truth is half the world's population sometimes walks for hours every day to get water. So which world do we really live in? That kind of thing. And that's kind of at the heart of what I was hoping we could talk about today. Would it be all right if I have a particular question I'm hoping to ask you to get started, and I hope that's okay. I want to tell you that, as I said, Elizabeth and I, and for several years now, since your Australia story piece was shared, have shared your that particular piece with audiences around the world. And when we finish watching it, I always ask the people who have seen it the same question. And what I'd like to do is, given the honor of this conversation, is ask you that question. And it fits with this background you have in your training and your learning in sociology and philosophy. And the question I always ask people after they've watched the Australia Story piece is, who is Greg Smith? And I ask from two perspectives. One is, and I'm going to ask you specifically, if we were in a position to ask the people at the orphanage or the people at the juvenile facility or the people who you might have encountered as a young man in your life, who Greg Smith is, or in other words, how would a social worker describe your life within the institutions that exist in Australia? And then I ask people to use words to describe who they think you are based on the second half of that film, which is the story as it's told there of your of this transformation and this different life you create, and how you influence your sister's life, your nephew's life, your students' lives. And what I try to do is try to use the piece to ask people to slow down and think more generously about who people are than the way we've been taught to do it. And so I guess that's the background. So if I might ask you, who do you say that Gregory Peel Smith is? How would you answer that?
Okay, well, Gregory Peel Smith is a very different person to Greg Smith.
Ah.
Okay. Greg Smith was a very troubled individual, very angry individual, who really was so full of grief, trauma, anger, that there was no space within that person to understand what other people were about, what society was about. There was no room inside of that person to understand what he was about. So one of the transitions that took place from Greg Smith into Gregory Smith, and that's even before it was Dr. Gregory Smith, because that's another transition again. But from Greg Smith into Gregory Smith was a desire, a deep desire not to be Greg Smith anymore, but to be a better person, but not just a better person, to be the person I wanted to be the person that if I could construct any person, how would I like that person to look? Mm. And when I stopped and I started to think about that, and I started to look at who I was and what the transition processes needed to be, I got a little bit excited because I realized that I can change. I can be the person I choose to be. It just takes time. It takes an open-mindedness. I call it, well, it's quite a common acronym, the how of life. You know, the honesty, the open-mindedness, and the willingness of life. So to be open-minded enough to be able to explore my own honesty and to have that willingness to change who I am. So Greg Smith, you asked me what other people thought Greg Smith was. Greg Smith was quite dangerous, very, very obnoxious, arrogant, inconsiderate, very selfish. But that selfish stemmed from a need to survive, a need to, and it's pure primal. When we look at wild animals, they will fight off other animals to get what they need, and that's what I was like.
Yeah,
I was quite literally in survival mode, primal mode, and that's a part of because I didn't understand that society. I hated society, and I thought I hated society. But what I didn't know is that I'd never, in my formative years, I'd never actually learned to be a part of anything, even a friendship. I'd never learned to be a part of a friendship. I'd never learned to be a part of a team. I'd never learned to work with anyone. So I was deprived of all these privileges of being a part of. And as I developed and as I grew and I opened up my mind and I opened up my heart and I became more and more willing to understand and to accept. First, the major acceptance I had to make was to accept me for who I really was. And at the time I didn't like that. To own myself, to own my actions, to own my thoughts. And that's, I think we talk a lot about what we like or what we don't like, people we like, people we don't like. But then are we looking at ourselves?
Yeah.
It's kind of perfect. Kevin and I were talking not even hours ago about the loss of humanness in so much of the work that we do. And, I think about that from the context of, how we are seen in the world, in our interactions with other people, our opportunities to be a part of a team, to teach someone else, to give back, to learn about ourselves through the eyes of others. Just, you said it much more beautifully than I probably ever will, but I can't help but be struck by the parallel of this morning and now, Kevin, and our discussions about sometimes the loss of connection, the loss of humanness in interaction in the work that we do, in even when we're trying to solve problems in the world, we forget the people in the middle of it.
We forget the people on the edges as well.
Yeah.
Yes. And when there's lots of ways of understanding that, but I think some of the best role models, the best teachers, the best carers, the best people to inform our children are the grandparents, the elders, the seniors within our communities.
Yeah.
And it's a two-way. It's a conduit that runs two ways because the young people invitalize the grandparents. They give them energy. The grandparents respond to the young people, and there's this conduit and this exchange of energies between the two, and it empowers both. It teaches the young people. It vitalizes the grandparents, and it forms those really good bonds. And as a Western society, I think we've commercialized the idea of aged care and preschool and all these other things, and we're depriving our citizens, our young people, of these great opportunities, and we're depriving the senior people and the grandparents of these great opportunities.
Yeah. To that point, again, I apologize because this is our only reference, but in the piece we saw in the Australian story, your friend Richard was in there. And that really fits with, I think, something Elizabeth and I are working a lot on with what you've just said. And that is, we view these things through what we would call a health lens. So when I think about what you've just said about, for example, separating aged care as something that an industry provides rather than something a family does, or the raising and teaching of children being done by scientists rather than being done by grandmothers and fathers. We think about that through the lens of health and what we are deprived of within our bodies, that this is not simply a psychological experience. This, we talk about this neck up kind of orientation, that everything's about cognitive, abilities. But think about how health promoting it is for a grandparent to experience the love of their grandchild and the opportunity to transmit a lifetime of learning to someone who is so precious to you. There's a component of that gets beyond the head, and I think that really came out in the Australian story piece. At one point Richard talked about said a few sentences describing how he imagined your health when you first came out of having lived in the forest. But then we can see your health in the film, right? We can see all this stuff you're engaged in, you're teaching, I happen to raise chickens, by the way, so I really related to you. That's how I calm myself down, is to walk into the chicken coop and turn everything off for a while. But I found that really meaningful, because Richard was describing your health as he imagined it, as you were, in the early days of becoming Gregory, and we could see your health as Gregory, and that really struck me. If I could add one other thing, I apologize, but I don't recall for some reason the psychologist's name in the piece. Christina. And Elizabeth, do you remember what you said about Christina and what she said about, this is Elizabeth's a very wise young professional, and which is why I love hanging out with her so much. And she had a powerful insight, I thought, for some of our audiences about Christina that I would ask her to share with you, if that's okay. Do you want to?
Yeah, sure. I think, part of what strikes me about her and the relationship that you all had is, she says in the film, and I'm sure she said to you, when you weren't being filmed also, I always knew of your unique gifts and capabilities. Not I know now, not because you've evolved, I've seen that. I've always seen that in you. And for me, I think professionally and personally, I've got a young lady in my life, which is actually how Kevin and I met, who had a very difficult care experience. And I came into her life as a case manager and left her life as her mom, and had a similar conversation about always knowing her capabilities, who she was, how many gifts she held inside her, including gifts that I think grew from great pain and adversity. And Christina says in the film that we show all the time, and I then talk about in our training groups of hundreds of people, I always knew that you were capable of great things.
She said that to me very early, probably after I interviewed her to be a psychologist for me, because I'd had a set of ideas and objectives, and I wasn't about to compromise those. And it was a process, but the first time I seen her, or like as in spoke with her, and I asked her a few questions to make sure that she was the right person for me to work with. she said, I've never been tested like this before.
Mm.
And and I just said to her, well, this is only the beginning. It's like, this is the future of the relationship. I will test it. Because I test myself.
Yeah.
And that's what it's about for me in that context.
Yeah.
But I think for me and for Christina, I think it was a good meeting at the time. It was the right meeting. It was the right thing at the time. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I mentioned to you when I contacted you that that Elizabeth, actually today, in fact, as it turned out, the same day we're speaking, Elizabeth and I interviewed Bruce Perry this morning. As you may remember, Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Perry released a book last week, and I did. There it is, and I did, as I promised, your professional colleague who helped coordinate this. I did share the film as well as a link to your book and a perspective about why I think what you're doing is so important. And so I want you to know I did share that with them, as I said I would.
Okay.
And
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Catherine.
Catherine, that's right. So I wanted to say that a moment ago, you answered a question I've been asking about you for a few years beautifully and profoundly. And it so fits with the book that Dr. Perry and Oprah released last week, and I've been doing press for in a very interesting way. If you don't mind my sort of running this by you, and then I really like your particular perspective, because of course you really have a whole different base of knowledge to offer to this, and I wonder how it fits for you. But it fits to me just in the way you answered my question, and that was to begin. Dr. Perry said this. He said human beings are always moving forward, and what he was saying is, when we think about healing, a lot of people think that healing is going back and making something like it once was. But that's not what healing is. It's about taking what's happened and making it what it will become. And I don't know if I said that as well as they could have said it, but boy, does that strike me as fitting so well with the way that you answered my question about moving from Greg Smith to Gregory Smith. It sounds like exactly that. It was not this vision that there was any place to go back to. It was really about where you wanted to go from where you were. Does that fit in your mind?
It fits very well.
Yeah. Can you say more about that? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Look, nothing stays the same.
Yeah.
Everything changes. So we can be passive in the way something changes, or we can take control and we can guide the changes or implement the changes that we desire.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to trauma, healing, young people, even older people, agency is really important. Taking ownership of the pain, taking ownership of that transition process.
Yeah.
And the clearer that I can understand that transition process, the more control I have of the outcomes of that process.
Yeah.
One of the things I realized was, when I started to heal, like emotionally, mentally, physically, and I'd be around the soup kitchens and I'd be having a few conversations because I was becoming interested. I was actually, and this is a part of that healing process, I was becoming interested in people, in listening to people, what they're saying, what they're doing. And people used to say to me, "You're really smart." And I think, well, no, I'm not. But then I realized that if I don't associate with other people, if I don't communicate with other people, then I have no benchmarks by which to measure my abilities, my intellect, my, anything. But as I heal and as I engage and as I become more willing and open, that how of life, the more I understand about myself, the healthier I become.
Yeah.
And health is very, there's a very strong correlation between happiness, being okay, and being healthy.
Mhm.
Yeah.
One of the great things I think I realised was that for me, there are only 3 days in every week in terms of my trauma, in terms of what had happened to me, and there's yesterday, there's today, and there's tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to make a decision about which day I was going to live in.
Mm.
Because if I lived in yesterday, I was going to just regurgitate all that trauma, relive the pain, it was just this cycle of over and over again. And I see that in people. They can't step out of yesterday. And then there's the other people that live in tomorrow. And tomorrow is so opaque. It's just a promise and a possibility. It's not real. And that only left me with today, and I wanted to experience reality. I wanted to experience today. I want to feel the sunshine. I want to feel the rain. I want to walk in the frost and the snow. I want to feel them today, not from yesterday, remember what it was like yesterday, or dream what it was like or what it might be like tomorrow. I want to live in today. And today is a beautiful place. And that helps me be healthy as well. And that today puts distance between everything else that's happened.
Yeah.
And if I sit comfortably in today, and there's nothing wrong with reflection. That's why we have little rear vision mirrors in our cars. Because, we don't have to turn our head and stare into the past. We can just look up at that rear vision mirror and get a glimpse and see what's behind us. And in my life, there's a lot of very valuable things. Every experience that I've ever had is valuable in some way.